listeners. Fine. Okay, one of the things which was remaining, I think, there in the listeners was there was one type of listener which was pending. Okay, let's see that. Fine. Just a quick review. What were the listeners we had seen yesterday? Or what kind of events we try to monitor? Let's try to list them. Okay, fine. Uh, we had listeners. Fine. So we had listeners. First listener was, get the listener called Servlet context listener. Fine. Yeah. So using this Servlet context listener, yes, what are the things which can for which we can write event handlers? Start and stop of a web application. Fine. Whenever a web application starts, a method on this listener would be invoked. So we need to override. When we want to write a listener, we should implement the Servlet context listener interface, and anything you would like to do at the beginning of the application when the application starts up can be specified in this by overriding the method. And we have the method called context initialized. Right? Where the parameter available would be the Servlet context event. Okay. Fine. So that's one. Okay. Servlet context listener. Fine. One of the things in Servlet context listener is a method which we can override, where we can override and specify our implementation. Fine. Implementation will be what we would like to do when the web application starts. So if you restart a web application, right? Okay. Fine. This method will be getting invoked. Fine. So you should create a class implementing this, and where we should specify in the web.xml as a listener. Just put listener entry. Fine. You have to specify listener and listener class. Okay. So this is one. Other was, what's the other method? Returns void. We have the method called context destroyed. And again here also parameter same as the Servlet context event. And in the Servlet context event, what is available to us? The Servlet context object will be available. Fine. We have the method in the Servlet context event called get Servlet context. Fine. So first listener which we had seen yesterday was Servlet context listener. Okay. Fine. Another kind of event is related to managing attributes in a Servlet context. Okay. So what was the second one? Servlet context attribute listener. And that was the other listener. Okay, in the Servlet context attribute listener, what are the methods? Yeah, there are three methods here. Attribute, added, fine, where the parameter is, what's the parameter here? Servlet context attribute event. And Servlet context attribute event. Fine. And yeah, what about the Servlet context attribute event? It extends from the Servlet context event. Fine. This class extends from the Servlet context event. Fine. And therefore we get the methods get Servlet context, that's an inherited method, plus additional method to get the attribute name and the attribute value. Okay, yeah, the three methods in servlet context attribute listener: attribute added. What's the other one? Removed. Fine. The other method is attribute removed, same parameters. And another method, attribute replaced. Okay, fine, where the parameter is the same. Fine, servlet context attribute event. Fine, so this is related to servlet context. Okay, fine, just like we have for servlet context, we also have, fine, so this is start and stop of application or monitoring if any attributes are added, removed or replaced in the servlet context object. So this has to do with servlet context object. Exactly similar things happening for servlet request. Fine. So for servlet request, yes, what are the methods? What's a listener? We have got servlet request listener. Okay. Fine. With the servlet request listener, the methods available. Yeah. Each time a request arrives, fine, from a client. Okay. Fine. We will have a method here getting invoked, yes, which is a request initialized. Fine. So servlet request listener, one of the methods when the request initialized, and the method is request initialized. Fine, with the parameters being servlet request event. Fine. And just like we have the servlet context event, there's a servlet request event. Okay, and same way we have the other method called request destroyed. Fine, with the parameter being the servlet request event. In servlet request event, what is available? The servlet context as well as the servlet request, and both objects will be available. Fine, which application? What is the request which has? Fine, the request which has just arrived. Fine. Okay, so when that's where we have the request initialized. So the request which has just arrived, and request destroyed at that time. Oh, this is the request whose processing is over. Fine. Okay, fine. And just similar thing, yes, what we also have is the servlet request attribute listener. Fine. The servlet request attribute listener. Yeah, what does it have? Three methods. Attribute related means three methods. Fine. Fine. Attribute. Method names are same. Only thing the parameter will be different, right? Return type void attribute added, attribute removed, and attribute replaced. Okay, and the parameter is servlet request attribute listener, attribute event. It's an event object. Fine. So that's a fine. 3 methods with parameter as servlet request attribute event. Okay. Fine. And then moving towards the javax.servlet.http package. Fine. A legacy interface. Fine. What's a legacy listener? Old one. HTTP session binding event, right? Session binding event. Fine. We have the let's get the exact method names. Okay, this is the one. Fine. Value bound and value. Fine. So it's what's the one? HTTP session binding listener. And that's a listener we are having. Okay, this listener, 2 methods only. Fine. This is similar to the attribute listener. It's on the lines of the attribute listener. In the sense that whenever, whenever there is a change in the attribute list of HTTP session, that time the method will be invoked. Fine. The methods are value bound and the parameter HTTP session binding event. Okay, that's our session binding event. Fine. 2 methods only, right? We have the method called value bound and value unbound. Parameter being HTTP session binding event. Fine. What does HTTP session binding event have? A method to get the HTTP session object. Fine. Get HTTP session. Okay. And other method is getting the name and value. Fine. 3 methods in all. Fine. We should. And from session, if you want to know the context, HTTP session has the method called get context. Okay. Fine. Fine. Get name, get value. Get session, get name, get value. 3 methods. Okay. Fine. Okay. Now, exactly same thing being done by a new listener interface. Okay. Which is nothing but HTTP session attribute listener. Yeah, it's an attribute listener. So what are the methods? Attribute listener, 3 methods: attribute added, attribute removed, and attribute replaced. But what's the parameter? The parameter is this one. It's a HTTP session binding event only, and there's no new event class. Okay, it's just that this is a listener as a replacement for the earlier listener. Okay. And this came in a later version. And so methods, fine. With parameter being and the same one, binding event, same as this. Attribute added, removed, and replaced. Okay. Then when this is change in attributes of a HTTP session, fine, we would like to monitor what's happening to the HTTP session itself, right? When does the container, whenever a container starts tracking a new user, fine, a new HTTP session would be created. Okay, so we have our HTTP session listener, and this would have 2 methods. Okay, let's get familiar with this. Yeah, that's fine. The 2 methods here, it's not initialized, they call it as session created. And the methods are session created and session destroyed. Okay, session created, parameter would be HTTP session event. Two methods being session created, fine, and session destroyed. And the parameter we understand, it would be HTTP session event, and this should be, that's a listener for which we have HTTP session event, and so the parameter is HTTP session event. Right. Okay, there's one more listener. I think this is what we had seen yesterday. Clear? We had seen up to this point. Fine. So this is about like the life of servlet context, the life of servlet request, the life of a HTTP session, and then attributes in all 3 of them. Fine. Okay. Now there's something about HTTP session, okay, which is related to the clustering. See, our web application can be deployed in a clustered way. Fine, you might have a clustering being fine used here. For example, why clustering? Why do we need clustering? Cluster, we understand. We have, let's say, for example, what's our domain? Oh, we have our Google server. Fine, we'll say, oh, google.com is a domain. But it's not just one machine. which is going to service, because there are so many requests which are coming, one machine cannot handle. So what do we have to handle that single domain? Fine, it's a whole cluster of machines. Fine, there's a whole cluster. Fine. So same way, a Tomcat server may be deployed on a cluster. Your web application may be available on a cluster. Okay. So doing it on a cluster. Fine. If we have a cluster, fine, it would look like this. See what we normally have in a cluster. Your request would come to a master machine, let's say. Okay. It will not do any processing. And it will only be saying that, okay, there are other machines in the cluster. Fine. And it would just be forwarding the request to one of them. Whichever has less load, fine, it will try to see load balancing is one of the things which a clustering can do. Okay, so when a request arrives, yes, it will be sent to any one of them. Fine. Now when we think of Tomcat, fine, and our web application, okay, web application deployed in Tomcat. Tomcat in a clustered environment would be, okay, Tomcat, the same Tomcat with the same set of applications would be running here, here, and here, as well as maybe here. Fine, there's a clustering. Okay, when the request arrives, fine, what will the master do? It will have to forward this request to one of the nodes, fine, for processing. Okay, fine. So yes, your request may get processed here, it may get processed here, or it may get processed here. One thing, for our application, the servlet context object has been created in all the three places. Okay, you might have a servlet context listener which has created its own set of initial objects and made available in the servlet context as an attribute. So there are attributes in the servlet context. Fine. Now just think about, even if there are attributes in a servlet request, fine, if there are attributes in a servlet request, a particular request, life is only that request, processing of that request gets processed over a single machine. Fine, whichever machine may be handling, whichever node may be handling the request, it's getting processed there itself. The life for the attributes is only going to be that much. Fine, once the request is over, the attributes will be thrown away from the request. Okay, but think of a session. Just think about a session. If we have a session, okay, what's the life of a session? Is it one request? We say, oh, the container starts tracking the client. A subsequent request, and someone says get session. When someone says get session, what session will he get? Gets it from the container. For this session ID, right? There is a session ID available in the request. For this session ID, give me the session object. Fine, what is the session ID available from the request? Requests from client have a session ID. Fine. If this client is being tracked, who started tracking him? Maybe it is the node 1 which said, oh, fine, the request came here and it was decided that we need to start tracking him. What about the other machines? This session is being, the starting to track the session has been done in node 1, node 2, node 3. They are not involved. See, each node a separate Tomcat running. Each one is an independent node. Find the requirement, you can see. If the next time the request which is from the same client with this particular session ID which has been generated on node 1, okay, if that one comes again to the, fine, if that client is again connecting and making a request, because of the load balancing thing, this might go to another node. Fine. That session ID, would it be available on the other node? It has to be, right? It should be made available. Fine. And there would be, even here also, management of attributes would be done. Right. So what actually needs to be done is, yes, if there is a session ID which is already existing on any one of the nodes, fine, and the request is moving to a different node, okay, all the attributes for this session so far have to be made available to the new place. Fine. The request came to the node 1, it was being processed here. Our session object has been created for this client over here. Some attributes might have been, some objects may have been stored here. Fine. Adding of attributes can be done, set attribute. Okay. So this session object has to be made available to the other machine because the request is going to the other machine. The next request comes to a different machine. Okay. So one of the things, all the objects on this HTTP session will have to be moved from here to the other machine. Fine, they have to be moved. Yeah, they are, it's not this way. They may be moving directly, that's fine. Fine, but they have to move to the other machine, from one node to another node. So one of the requirements is, if you are writing an application which is used in a cluster, which is probably going to be used in a cluster, you want to make it such that yes, it is going to be available on a cluster, then the requirement would be any attribute which you set on your HTTP session object. Fine, any attributes being set on HTTP session object, they all must be serializable. Otherwise, you can't transport them to the other machine. Fine, we understand. Only serializable objects can be transported on a TCP/IP connection. Fine. So this would be these objects. Fine, the session along with its object. Mainly the objects in the session needs to be put to the other machine, from one machine to the other machine. Okay, fine. So one requirement is objects being managed, the attributes being managed in HTTP session, we should try to see that they are all serializable only. And non-serializable thing, those attributes will not get transported. That's one thing. So there'll be exceptions getting thrown, they may go into the log of the server, but you will not realize them. Fine. Okay, fine. The other thing, now what is there to do with the listeners now? Okay, what we also have here is, we have a listener. We have a listener called HTTP session activation listener. What is being done is, the session is being activated at a new place and it is being passivated at the old place. The old place is told that yes, now this is being shifted to a new machine. This session is being shifted to a new machine. The new machine is being told, your session is the one which is the current one. Fine. Okay. Both of them, on both of them, a method would be invoked. We have a method called session did activate and session will passivate. Let's check the methods exactly. Fine. So we have these methods. Okay. Yeah, session did activate and session will passivate. The parameter is HTTP session event. So it's only which session has changed from one place to another place. Okay, when it says session will activate, that's on the new machine. Session will passivate, the old machine where this was, fine, last time where this was active. This session was active at one place. So, fine, changing of session from one machine to the other, one node to another node within a cluster. And that's where we have this interface called HTTP session activation listener. Okay. Fine, we have the HTTP session activation. Listen. Fine. Methods here. And return type void. Fine, we have the event as, what is the event corresponding to this? The event is HTTP session event. Fine. In HTTP session event, the method available is get session. Fine, you get the HTTP session object and the methods. Fine, there are two methods. Return type is void. We have the method called session did activate. And parameter is the event object. And session will passivate. Right, so clear the kind of listeners which we are having. And so that's the listeners thing. Right? Listeners, but you just have to implement the listener interface. And most commonly, what we might be able to try out are the listener for servlet context. Fine. At start of an application, we might like to do certain things, right? Okay. Fine. Maybe something to do with the JDBC connection. Fine. Or any other information, maybe some masters we might like to even load and keep them and in memory. Okay, such things you might do in the servlet context listener. Okay, let's introduce an exercise here. Yeah, when we have done certain things, but and let's introduce exercises. Yeah, now coming to a very simple application, any small web application, and which should involve maybe setting up of cookies, fine, managing a session. Okay, fine. I just want to familiarize with managing cookies session, fine, managing session and having some cookies also. So for our case, what we can do is any web application, and you will normally provide a login. Okay, and then log out. Login should be there. Fine. When someone does a login, what do? Yeah, when someone says login, you show him some welcome page. Okay, fine, and then fine. There might be so many other things which you might provide for in your application, but one of the links would be a logout. And when he does a logout, what we normally do when someone does a login is we start tracking the client. Fine, we create a session. Fine. When he does a login, we'll show a welcome page. In the welcome page, all his name, full name, and all such things can be shown, right? Not just the login ID, based on login ID. So you might have something for a user being able to log in. Okay, let's design things for him. But yeah, before that, I think we should get familiar. Before we can go into that writing the application itself, we should look at one more aspect, which is about, yeah, we should understand what is a JSP. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Just look at the Hello Servlet. What have we done in Hello Servlet? What was Hello Servlet? It was implementation of servlet where 5 methods. Yes, what were the implementation of those methods? Especially let's concentrate on the lifecycle methods. In init, what was done? Fine. Oh, we just manage our servlet config object. Nothing else. Okay. Fine. There was nothing additional being done. What was service method like? Let's examine the service method. What is it like? What for hello servlet? What did we do in the service method? Got the response object. Okay, we get the request and response objects in the service method. What do we do with the response object? Set the content type to text HTML. Fine. Most of the time, yes, we are going to give a output which will be text HTML, and then got a print writer. Fine, we got a writer, and then we said out.println what? In double quotes, what? HTML. Fine, we just put out.println multiple times with some HTML. Fine, inside your Java code, you are just embedding HTML. Fine, rest of the things, if you look at it, it's almost going to be the same. Whatever is the HTML design, your page you want to show, that's going to be different, right? So instead of writing inside Java file like this, why not ask a web page designer? Fine, a web page designer is good with HTML. Fine, a Java programmer may not be so good with HTML. Fine, so we can have our web page designer, we can ask our web page designer to create a nice looking page for us. Okay, and whatever file he gives us, okay, so let's say he gives us a file called .html, right, something .html, and then we'll say, okay, we can write a tool, we can write a simple utility which can read from this file and create a Java file. What will that Java file have? Oh, I have a public class so and so extends or it implements, it can extend from generic servlet, and it has been overriding the method called service in the service method overriding. So it's all a fixed thing up to the point of getting the writer. Once you get the writer, read from that file, put double quotes and each line. Out.println, double quotes, what is the text there? Pick it up, put it here, double quote over, and so you have actually a code. You can write a utility which can do the job of converting from HTML to Java. Fine, and then, okay, in that utility we can add a facility of compiling it also. And then it becomes easy to manage. Fine. So you ask your friend, a web page designer, to design the pages, run the tool, and you are ready with your servlets. Fine. Okay, so that's our next exercise, writing that tool. Fine, we can write that tool, right? Okay, we don't need to write that tool. It's built into the container. This is what is built into the container. Only thing what you are supposed to do is, you ask your friend to generate a web page, right? But then ask him to save it not with the extension of .html, but with the extension of .jsp. Fine. If you save it with the extension of .jsp, This is what is going to happen. When what the container will do, someone requires to look at that JSP. There's a request to look at that JSP. What the container will do? That JSP is nothing but HTML. It's a whole of HTML content. It will do this exercise. It's a utility which is doing the exercise of reading the HTML, converting it into Java code, which is a servlet. Okay, fine. Compiling it and using it like a servlet. Fine. Uses it like a servlet. Fine. HTML, yes. So what is the input here? What is JSP? What is JSP? Yeah. What's a JSP from this? What do you make out of JSP? HTML. JSP is basically HTML. JSPs are made up of tags. What tags? Oh, we got all the HTML tags. We got all the HTML tags. Fine. Okay. It's not only HTML tags. Fine. That's one thing. Basically, what is JSP? Okay, what was servlet? If you look at servlet, in servlet, in case of a servlet, it's a whole Java code. Fine, you are writing it in Java, but you are embedding HTML inside a Java code. Fine. And what is JSP? It's all HTML. Fine. It's full of your tags, HTML tags, in which you have a provision of embedding your Java code also. We'll see what different ways of embedding some parts of your Java code. Fine. Plus, one main thing is, yeah, it's normally full of tags. Very closer to a web page designer. Something what a web page designer is familiar with. He is used to using tags only. He won't be used to familiar with writing some Java code. Okay, fine. So yes, JSPs are for web page designers. And it's mainly job of web page designer. But we need to understand from the point of view of Java, right? So it's Java server pages, JSP. Okay, fine. JSP stands for Java Server Pages. Okay, fine. So yes, we can write a hello JSP. How? Write HTML, save it as .jsp. Fine. The container will do the job of converting it into Java. Fine. And compiling and using it like a servlet. Fine. We can first have a look at a simple JSP being created. And we can create a simple JSP called hello.jsp. Fine. Of course, for each JSP, there would be a separate servlet class which would have to be created. So depending on the name, for example, if your JSP file name is, let's say, hello.java, right? Hello.jsp, that's your JSP, right? If that's a JSP, it will define a class for the servlet, fine, which is known as hello_JSP dot class. And something like this it will do. And it will be organizing your JSPs by using the, it will organize your classes by using this JSP name. So a different JSP is different class. Okay, so fine. In the translation process, what's going to happen? What's going to be done in the translation process? Fine. If we try to understand what is the translation, how the translation is happening, how is the translation happening? Yeah. So, okay, we can look at the part which is changing, right? So, in the service method, in the translation, there will be output of Java file. Translation means conversion of JSP to Java. Okay, conversion from JSP to Java. So, in that, we have our service method, but what is there inside the service method? Up to the point of a place where it will say out equals, fine, getting a writer. Okay, but then onwards, the change starts. It says out dot println, or it might have used the write, and in double quotes any HTML which it is coming across, right? Out dot println. Yeah. Now within this fixed HTML page, fine, our JSP is all HTML currently. Within this fixed HTML page, somewhere you might like to say, okay, whatever is the time on the server, I would like to see that. Date and time of the server. Yeah. How would you have done it if you were writing a servlet? You are writing out.println everywhere. And then at some place he says, oh, let me see the date and time. We have a class called java.util.date, and the object of that is something which you might like to just, let's use the toString method of that. I just want to print it out. Create a new object of java.util.date and print it out. Fine. So your code would have been out.println, instead of saying double quotes, it would have said new java.util.date. Let's create the object. There's no double quotes. You want things to be done without the double quotes. And then of course, anything after this you will have is, okay, you still have a lot of things, but you have certain things which are, it may be saying new java.util.date or some other place. You might say, okay, in the request, let me print his IP address. I'm not interested in printing. You have printed some quotes, fine, in double quotes you have said, okay, in double quotes you're saying, remote user is so and so, right? Remote user, colon, and in the next line you'll say, okay, out.write request dot get parameter or get remote user, right? Request has a method called get remote user. Get remote user, right? Request dot get remote user, and I want to print who's the remote user to be embedded inside my output. Fine. What you are having is, you are having output statements which are hard-coded, double quotes, fixed HTML. You are having output which are Java expressions. Fine. With println, what is the parameter? Single parameter, which is going to be some kind of an expression. It's a Java expression. Some valid Java expression is what you will pass. Fine. So if you have, fine, if you want such a thing to happen, okay, for your JSP, fine. So if you got if I look at a JSP file, okay, you have your tags. Fine, these are all, it's a valid HTML page, as if I'm writing HTML. But within this, so whatever is HTML, that goes with double quotes. Fixed. Okay, but within this, I want certain things without the double quotes. They are for output. I want certain Java expressions to be there. So if you want to embed any Java expression in your output, fine, in your JSP page, along with all the HTML part, you can use what we call as expressions. It's similar to writing a tag, but only part thing is, yes, when you say less than percentage equal to, it opens up a place for specifying a Java expression. Okay, here in this, you are able to specify new java.util.date. Percentage greater than, that's the end of expression. So you can anywhere in your HTML, fine, JSP is nothing but full of HTML. Anywhere within the JSP, along with the HTML tags, you might embed a JSP expression. So JSP has expressions, provision of expression, and you continue with your other HTML. So it's just like saying out.println in double quotes, all those fixed things, out.println, this would be without the double quotes. If you have put anything like this is picked up and out.println without the double quotes. And it's nothing but a servlet. Fine, servlet which is producing this in its output. And there's many, fine, JSPs are designed for giving output, not for any processing. This servlet is not for processing. This servlet is mainly designed for output purpose, presentation purpose. It's an HTML. HTML is for presentation. Fine, we'll look at other things. Fine, so a JSP is nothing but an HTML in which we can add certain scripting elements. There are scripting elements of JSPs which are going to be available. One such element is a expression. Okay, and we'll continue with JSPs tomorrow.